The purpose of Freethought Forum is to be vigilant to the encroachment of religion into government and to educate the general public as to what a freethinker is.
No scholar can map them,
no hunter can trap them, no person can deny die Gedanken sind frei, no person can deny.
Hi, welcome to Freethought Forum. I'm your host today. My name is Jeff Levan, and today I'm going to be telling you about someone who was probably the most famous freethinker of all time. He is a man who, unless you're well up on church and state separation issues, or unless you're a historian, you probably don't recall his name. However, during his time, he was known as the Great Agnostic, and he was probably the foremost critic of Orthodox religion during his lifetime. Wherever he spoke, there were thousands that came to hear him. This was before public address systems. He would have crowds of 5,000 and 10,000 people at times. I don't know how they all heard him. He must have had a tremendous voice. At least he has a reputation of having a tremendous voice. But he was very popular during his time. H.L. Mencken said of him, "He drew immense crowds. He planted seeds of infidelity that still sprout in Harvard and Yale. Thousands abandoned their accustomed places of worship to listen to his appalling heresies, and great numbers of them never came back." Among his admirers were Clara Barton, the founder of the American Red Cross, Andrew Carnegie, the philanthropist, Thomas Edison, Clarence Darrow, Eugene Debs, and Frederick Douglass counted him among their friends. Samuel Clemens wrote of him, "He is the most beautiful human creature that ever lived." His name was Robert Green Ingersoll, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about him today. I'm going to read you a couple of the things that he wrote, a couple of his thoughts, one of them having to do with religion in general, and the other one specifically concerning church and state. And it's very pertinent to today, and it's interesting that he lived over 100 years ago, and yet the things that he said are very important, and they still hold true today. Robert Ingersoll was born in Dresden, New York, August 11th, 1833. His father was a Methodist minister. In his youth, Ingersoll was, as you would expect a Methodist minister's son to be, learned in the Bible and studious towards the Bible. He went to church every Sunday and did the things that you would expect of a child of a Methodist minister. One of the things about his father that was different that he noticed right off, his father was an abolitionist. In the 1830s and 40s, this was not always a popular view. He did not want slavery attached to his country, and he was vehement about it. It cost him the pulpit in many churches that he preached in. He refused to quit preaching against the institution of slavery. Now, at this time, you must remember, the United States was the largest slave trading nation in the world. And Ingersoll, of course, shared his father's sentiments. But as he read more and more of the Bible, he realized that specifically the Old Testament held up these ideas as biblical. The Old Testament glorified slavery, sacrifice, and many other forms of torture and cruelty. And this confused Ingersoll, and he set about learning more about the Bible and about other works, people that had written other things other than the Bible. This led him to go through what you might call a deconversion. He became interested in the things in the Bible he found that were not true. And later on in life, he went on to become a speaker, and he spoke very often criticizing the Bible and Christianity as it was taught then. I'm going to quote you a little something about him, and it's talking about his deconversion, talking about his change of thought, and I guess I'll just get into it right here. "All the seeds of Christianity, of superstition, were sown in my mind and cultivated with great diligence and care. All that time I knew nothing of any science, nothing about the other side, nothing of the objections that had been waged against the blessed Scriptures or against the perfect congregational creed. And yet, in spite of all I had heard, of all I read, I could not quite believe. My brain and heart said no. I studied astronomy, just a little. I examined maps of the heavens. I learned the names of some of the constellations, of some of the stars, found something of their size and the velocity with which they wheeled in their orbits, obtained a faint conception of astronomical spaces, found that some of the known stars were so far away in the depths of space that their light traveling at nearly 200,000 miles per second required many years to reach this little world, found that compared with the great stars, our earth was but a grain of sand, and Adam found that the old belief that all the hosts of heaven had been created for the benefit of man was infinitely absurd. I compared what was really known about the stars with the account of creation as told in Genesis. I found that the writer of the inspired book had no knowledge of astronomy. If he had known these facts, would he have said that Jehovah worked nearly 6 days to make this world and only a part of the afternoon of the fourth to make the sun and the moon and all the stars? The story is inconsistent with all we know about facts, and every star shining in the heavens testified that. Its author was an inspired barbarian. Then I studied geology, just enough to know that the inspired writer knew nothing of the history of the earth, nothing of the great forces of nature, of wind and wave and fire, forces that have destroyed and built, wrecked and wrought through all the countless years. I then studied biology, just enough to know something of animal forms, enough to know that life existed when the Laurentian rocks were made, just enough to know that these animals had ceased to exist hundreds of thousands of years before the manufacture of Adam and Eve. Then I felt sure that the inspired record was false, that many millions of people had been deceived, and that all I had been taught about the origins of world and men was utterly untrue. I felt that I knew that the Old Testament was the work of ignorant men, that it was a mingling of truth and mistake, of wisdom and foolishness, of cruelty and kindness, of philosophy and absurdity, that it contained some elevated thoughts, some poetry, a good deal of the solemn and commonplace, some hysterical, some tender, some wicked prayers, some insane predictions, some delusions, and some chaotic dreams. Of course, the theologians fought the facts found by the geologists, the scientists, and sought to sustain the sacred scriptures. They mistook the bones of the mastodon for those of human beings, and by them proudly proved that there were giants in those days. They accounted for the fossils by saying that God had made them to try our faith, or that the devil had imitated the works of the Creator. They answered the geologists by saying that the days in Genesis were long periods of time, and that after all the flood may have been local. They told the astronomers that the sun and the moon were not actually, only apparently stopped, and that the appearance was produced by the reflection and refraction of light. They excused the slavery and polygamy, the robbery and murder taught in the Old Testament by saying that the people were so degraded that Jehovah was compelled to pander to their ignorance and prejudice. In every way, the clergy sought to evade the facts, to dodge the truth, to preserve the creed. At first, they flatly denied the facts. Then they belittled them. Then they harmonized them. Then they denied they had denied them. Then they changed the meaning of the inspired book to fit the facts. At first, they said that if the facts, as claimed, were true, the Bible and Christianity itself was a superstition. Afterward, they said the facts, as claimed, were true, and that they established beyond all doubt the inspiration of the Bible and the divine origin of Orthodox religion. Anything they could not dodge, they swallowed, and anything they could not swallow, they dodged. I gave up the Old Testament on account of its mistakes, its absurdities, its ignorance, and its cruelty. I gave up the New Testament because it vouches for the truth of the Old. I gave it up on account of its miracles, its contradictions, because Christ and his disciples believed in the existence of devils, talked and made bargains with them, expelled them from people and animals. This is of itself enough. We know, if we know anything, that devils do not exist, that Christ never cast them out, and that if he pretended to, he was either ignorant, dishonest, or insane. These stories about devils demonstrate the human, ignorant origin of the New Testament. I gave up the New Testament because it rewards credulity and curses brave and honest men, and because it teaches the infinite horror of eternal pain. Well, that was Ingersoll's comments on why he gave up religion. And when we come back from a public service announcement, I'm going to quote you something he had to say in specific about the subject of separation of church and state. And we'll be right back after this public service announcement.
Hello, I'm Dan Barker. I'm a former minister and a former evangelist. For many years, I preached the gospel of Jesus, the Bible, miracles, and faith. Now, I'm an atheist. I'm an atheist because in my thirst for truth, I discovered that religious beliefs do not withstand the test of evidence and reason. As a freethinker, I now see the dangers of fundamentalism, and I become a member of a free thought group which is working to keep church and state separate. Won't you join in this critically important effort? Write to me.
Freethought Today, Post Office Box 750, Madison, Wisconsin 53701.
With the Union Army during the Civil War. He was a colonel, and after the war he turned to the business of law, became a lawyer and a speaker, and he defended quite a few important people. One of his most famous trials was the man called C.B. Reynolds, who was charged in Virginia with a law that he had committed blasphemy, and Ingersoll spent many hours working on his case. Unfortunately, the jury decided against Ingersoll. However, Ingersoll paid the fine and refused to take any payment for his services in this matter. He felt it was something that he needed to do as a point of conscience. He was specifically against the marriage of church and state, as are many religious people. And I'm going to quote here something that he had said about that, and let's see what you think of it. He said, "If there is to be an acknowledgement of God in the Constitution, the question naturally arises as to which God is to have this honor. Shall we elect the God of the Catholics, who has established an infallible church presided over by an infallible pope? Is it to be the God of the Presbyterian, with the 5 points of Calvinism, who is ingenious enough to harmonize necessity and responsibility, and who in some ways justifies himself for damning most of his own children? Is it the God of the Puritan, the enemy of joy, of the Baptist, who is great enough to govern the universe and small enough to allow the destiny of a soul to depend on whether the body it inhabited was immersed or sprinkled? What God is it proposed to put in the Constitution? Is it the God of the Old Testament, who was a believer in slavery and justified polygamy? If slavery is right then, it is right now. If Jehovah was right then, the Mormons are right now. What court, what tribunal of last resort is to define this God? And who is to make known his will? In his presence, laws passed by men will be of no value. The decisions of courts will be as nothing. But who is to make known the will of this supreme God? Will there be a supreme tribunal composed of priests? The government of the United States is secular. It derives its power from the consent of man. It is a government with which God has nothing whatever to do, and all forms and customs inconsistent with the fundamental fact that the people are the source of authority should be abandoned. For many years, priests have attempted to give our government a religious form. This is going on nowadays, by the way. There are people called Reconstructionists who are pushing for a new constitutional convention. Zealots have succeeded in putting the legend upon our money, "In God we trust." And we have chaplains in the Army and Navy, and legislative proceedings are usually opened with a prayer. All this is contrary to the genius of the Republic, contrary to the Constitution of the United States. We have taken the ground that the people can govern themselves without the assistance of any superior power. We have taken the position that the people are the real and only rightful source of authority. We have solemnly declared that the people must determine what is politically right and what is wrong, and that their legally expressed will is the supreme law. This leaves no room for patriotic gods or national superstition, or the supernatural beings, and this does away with the necessity for political prayers. If God is allowed in the Constitution, man must abdicate. There is no room for both. The people of the United States are intelligent. They no longer believe implicitly in supernatural religion. They are losing confidence in the miracles and marvels of the Dark Ages. They know the value of the free school. They appreciate the benefits of science. They are believers in education, in the free play of thought, and there is a suspicion that the priest, the theologian, is destined to take his place with the necromancer, the astrologer, the worker of magic, and the professor of the black art. When the theologian governed the world, it was covered with huts and hovels for the many, palaces and cathedrals for the few. The poor were clad in rags and skins. They devoured crusts and gnawed bones. The day of science dawned, and the luxuries of a century ago are the necessities of today. But over and above all this is the development of mind. There is more of value in the brain of an average man of today, of a master mechanic, of a chemist, of a naturalist, of an inventor, than there was in the brain of the world 400 years ago. These benefits did not drop from the outstretched hands of priests. They were not found in cathedrals or behind altars. Neither were they searched for with holy candles. They were not discovered by the closed eyes of prayer, nor did they come in answer to superstitious supplication. They are the children of freedom, the gifts of reason, observation, and experience. And for them all, man is indebted to man. Let us hold first to the sublime declaration of Lincoln. Let us insist that this, the Republic, is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Well, I certainly agree with that. Ingersoll was a champion of free speech and free thought. And when he died in New York City, July 21st, 1899, this world lost one of the greatest minds this country has ever known. Clarence Darrow said in remembrance, "I pay homage to Robert Ingersoll. His acts mark him as one of the bravest, grandest champions of human history the world has ever known. Ingersoll was a great man, a wonderful intellect, and a great soul, of matchless courage, one of the great men of the earth, and yet we have no right to bow down to his memory simply because he was great. Great orators, great soldiers, great lawyers often use their gifts for a most unholy cause. We meet to pay a tribute of love and respect to him because he used his matchless power for the good of man." If you'd like to read more about Ingersoll, you can pick up books at the public library or write to us at Freethought Forum. Our address is 999 East Bassey Road, Suite 180, San Antonio, Texas, 78209. That's all I have for today. And I'd just like to remind you that Freedom from Religion Foundation and Freethought Forum support works of men like Ingersoll in this, and we're working hard to try to keep church and state separate. If you're interested in that also, give us a call or drop us a line and let us know. And if you disagree with us or you have a question, I'd like to start answering those questions on the programs if you'll only send them to the address I just mentioned. We'll post that again after the show. In leaving, I'd like to mention one more thing that Ingersoll had written. He was against creeds, but he wrote something. He felt that if mankind did have to have a creed, he thought this would serve pretty well. This is the creed of Robert G. Ingersoll. To love justice, to long for the right, to love mercy, to pity the suffering, to assist the weak, to forget wrongs and remember benefits, to love the truth, to be sincere, to utter honest words, to love liberty, to wage relentless war against slavery in all its forms, to love wife and child and friend, to make a happy home, to love the beautiful in art, in nature, to cultivate the mind, to be familiar with the mighty thoughts that genius has expressed, the noble deeds of all the world, to cultivate courage and cheerfulness, to make others happy, to fill life with the splendor of generous acts, the warmth of loving words, to discard error, to destroy prejudice, to receive new truths with gladness, to cultivate hope, to see the calm beyond the storm, the dawn beyond the night, to do the best that can be done, and then to be resigned. This is the religion of reason, the creed of science. It satisfies the heart and brain. Thank you.
I think as I please, and this gives me pleasure.
My conscience decrees, this right I must treasure.
My thoughts will not cater
To duke or dictator, no person can deny. Die Gedanken sind frei.